Hi, Bonnie. Welcome back to our drawing, demonstration videos here. So for this video, I'm going to show you, kind of how I go about doing some of these gesture drawings and like quick kind of figure drawings. Most of this, my reference is going to be off of the camera, or off the angle here. So I wanted you to be able to kind of see what I'm going to be referencing. So I'm going to do two figures in this demo. I'm going to do a male and a female because each are, somewhat different in that, male anatomy tends to be a little bit more on the hard side, hard edge, whereas female anatomy tends to be a little bit more on the soft side. I looked all over for this book of figure poses that I've seen in the past, but I couldn't find one, so I'm using poses that I pulled off of the internet there. But hopefully, you'll be able to get at least some kind of an idea of how I go about doing this. But I'm also going to do each one separately, so I'll do probably the male figure first and then the female figure, but I'm going to start simply like with our, very quick, couple, few seconds to a minute kind of stick figure sketch, and then we're going to elaborate on it and get a little bit more detailed with it. Now, it's not going to be fully rendered or anything like that, but the idea is to show, kind of how we might go about doing this. And the other thing is I'm going to be using Conte crayon for this. I think you might have gotten some, but in case you don't know, this is the brand that I'm using, Conte au Paris. But it's an interesting material. It's kind of like a cross between a charcoal and a pastel almost. So it's actually pigment mixed with a kind of clay. So it's a little creamier to use and things like that. But the pack I had two pieces in it, and one of them broke in transits at some point. But I'm going to use one part just as is, as the kind of square stick. And then I've got the bigger piece, which I put a little bit of a point on by filing it down with an X-Acto knife. So I'll probably use this one more for my general stuff, maybe some shading a little bit, and then maybe the pointed one for a little bit of detail as we go into it. Now, the other thing to note about Conte is it doesn't really erase quite as well as charcoal and other things, so it's a little bit more kind of permanent. That doesn't mean that it can't be erased, it just takes a little bit more effort. But for the purposes of figure drawing, and especially these gestures, I always thought it was a nice material to use because it doesn't really allow you to be fussy about it. It's, the unforgivingness of it kind of forces you to be really direct and bold with what you're doing. And part of gesture drawing is really trying to capture that kind of boldness, if you will. The other thing is, learning as I went through school, is that drawing on, this newsprint, which is pretty cheap paper, and especially in figure drawing classes when I was there, I'd go through 2 or 3 of these pads of paper in a semester. It's because this material is creamier, it's a lot nicer to draw with on this particular type of paper, as opposed to, especially when it's on a pad instead of just like a single sheet on the board or something. That's kind of a OCD thing of mine, is the way things feel when you're using them. It kind of becomes distracting when it's not a feeling that is good, if you will. But that being said, I'm going to jump into this, and I'm going to start by doing a quick gesture, so my kind of skeletal stick figure, if you will, and then we're going to go through and start adding mass and things like that to it, and then we'll go in and be a little bit more detailed. So hopefully you can see kind of what a general time frame for this is going to be. Now, the first thing I want to do is, I'm using my more bold stick, but I want to kind of approach this like we have been with other drawings, in that I want to create some guidelines for myself. So I want to try to fill the majority of the page here, but in doing so, I want to make a few kind of indications of where my figure needs to be. And so I'm going to make 2 marks. So I want the foot of the figure to be down here, and I want the head of my figure to be here. But from that, I can also take some quick measurements using my sighting. I'm going to use my X-Acto knife here. So from my perspective, the knife is about as tall as the figure needs to be. And then we're going to go just slightly shorter than that on the hand over here. Now, if I was just doing this purely, gesture, like warm-up gestures, I wouldn't make these marks, but because I would just kind of do it. But because I'm, gonna kind of elaborate on the same drawing for the sake of time for this video, I'm gonna go ahead and make those kinds of marks. And that's something that you can do as well. Now, the other thing that I want to do is I want to also think about my angle sighting as well. So, that's definitely something that it can be beneficial to you as well. So I'm going to start with the male figure here, and he's in kind of a crouching position, and I want to start with the spine, if you will. So I can do something like that. And then I want to look at the angle of his shoulders. So I want to make a mark for his shoulders, and then I want to look at the angle of his hips as well. And his hips are about where this mark is in relation to his hand, which is what I was measuring against. Now, from that, I can start to be a little bit more dynamic. So let's also say, let's make an indication of his head here as well. And so once again, you can see I'm not really being all of that detailed right now. I'm focusing more on broad spectrum ideas. And it's okay if I go a little past my mark as well. It's not the end of the world. So generally speaking, I have something kind of like that. So you can see how quickly I did that, and it's not very accurate by any means, but generally speaking, if I was doing this, for class-like purposes, I would really start by doing something very simple like this. And I could go back in and kind of erase and smudge these areas out, things of that nature. But that's basically, in terms of stick figures, what we're trying to accomplish. The other thing I can start to do is kind of more broader, kind of angle and shapes and things like that. And so, I can, make kind of subtle indications. And depending on how long that we're doing this for, or at least our time frame, I can sit there and be more kind of detailed with it and things like that. So in classes, we would do like a 30-second sketch, and would be something about like that. And you'd have 30 seconds to do it, and they would call time. It would be from the living model and everything like that. However, you might get a 40-second sketch in which you can start to make a little bit, more kind of detailed elements there. And then likewise, sometimes it would be a minute or a 2-minute gesture. And in that case, we might start actually filling in a little bit more material. So, we could think of things like the rib cage and things of that nature. And so, we can look at elements like that and start to think about how, you know, they're kind of interacting with, you know, what we would perceive as the skeleton, or the basic, you know, kind of form of the figure there, if you will. But let's so from there, you know, once again, this is a pretty simple gesture, but let's start to add a little bit more detail to him by fleshing this skeleton out somewhat. So I'm going to use these lines as basic areas to then go ahead and start, you know, kind of fleshing the figure out a little bit more. And so we want to kind of think about also how our lines, you know, connect between, you know, themselves and things of that nature. So, you know, how does the background behind the arm, things like that. And once again, I'm trying to be, you know, very quick. I'm not trying to be super detailed in this moment, but we'll get more and more detailed as I go here in a few minutes. So, and we'll break out the finer, you know, kind of, you know, pointed lead and everything like that, and we'll really start to, you know, focus more on specific things. So, we've got that. So once again, I'm trying to look at broad area kinds of things, and I'm also going to make an indication of some of the individual's facial features and things of that nature. However, I also want to look at some of the musculature as well, things like that. You know, where is the figure's, you know, kind of main areas, things along that line. But I'm still not trying to be super detailed right now, as we can probably see. Instead, I'm just trying to kind of fill in mass, if you will. And now what I'm going to do, just to help kind of differentiate some of this a little bit, I'm going to fill in a little bit of shadow here and there as well, before we go in and start making some of this a little bit more detailed. So I'm just trying to look at, you know, my reference and everything like that. I'm trying to look at where major things are. Things of that nature. Alright, so alright, so I've got a pretty decent kind of basic gesture here, and I've also got a little bit of indication of where some of my shadows and things are going to be. Now, I'm also going to come in and I'm going to erase out just a little bit of info here and there, just so I get a better sense of where some of the shadow and the light is. Now, once again, if you're doing the quick version, we might not, you know, pay attention to this, but as we begin to develop the figure a little bit more, this is something that we can pay more attention to. And so you can probably see how, you know, the Conte doesn't erase quite as well as, say, charcoal or, other things like that. However, it doesn't matter because we're going to do a little bit more kind of detail-y work with this as well. All right, so once again, this might be like a minute sketch or a 2-minute sketch, something of that nature. However, so we get the basic idea of the form. He's kind of crouching down somewhat. His one leg is coming forward. We're gonna need to make a few little corrections here and there as I go, but we have the basic idea that he's kind of lunging forward with his arms back and everything like that. So let's go in and try to do a little bit more detail and kind of flesh him out just a little bit more. Now with this, I've switched over to my pointed piece, and I'm going to be a little bit more careful as I go. As you can probably see, I was being fairly general right off the bat. But once again, I'm trying to look at the reference that I have, and I'm trying to, kind of think about how the finer details and lines of that are going to, kind of compare to my actual, base drawing, if you will. My gesture, if you will. All right. Alright, so I've already changed the position of the foot a little bit. I should have probably done them a little bit higher, but that's okay. So now that I've got that kind of going, let's also come in and do his arm, because that's another major feature. And that'll give us another anchor point for the back of his leg there. Once again, I'm trying to be fairly deliberate in my mark making and not super wishy-washy with it. But from there, you can see that his shoulder blades kind of protrude quite a bit. And the back of his head, we need to shift a little bit further over and downward some. Let's say he's got kind of a scowl on his face, like he's yelling. Yeah, coming along. And we also want to pay attention to where things would naturally come into play. You know, so his ear, the top of his ear, where it connects to the head, is going to line up with his eye and things like that. And it's going to extend to the bottom of his nose. So we got something kind of like that, and then his neck kind of comes in behind there. And the back of his head is a little bit more pointy. So we've got something kind of like that. And then we also have a line that extends from there as well. All right, so from there, now we've got a nice kind of basis to do the back of him here. So once again, I'm trying to be somewhat deliberate in my mark making. I also want to pay attention to the kind of shadows that I see cast across him, or at least those kind of harder shadows here and there. But from there, we can also come in and put that other leg in. And in this sense, I don't really see a whole lot on his toes or for his toes or anything like that. So I don't really need to worry about them so much. However, I can shift things a little bit here and there. You can see I'm using the rubber eraser because it's definitely going to take things down much easier here. But generally speaking, there we have a kind of a quick figure sketch, or a quick gesture, if you will. And so this would be maybe, you know, I'm sure you can tell by the time, but this would be maybe a 3 to 4 minute kind of sketch, something, you know, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But we could sit there and take it a little further if we wanted to, you know, by adding little bits of detail here and there, you know, so we can fill in certain areas and give them a little bit more definition, if you will. I'm actually gonna switch between a few of my two pieces here. So you'll see by, you know, doing the kind of light bit of sketch or shading at the beginning, I can then come in and add more specific shading, you know, or, you know, darker shading, if you will, to certain areas, and then therefore it gives it a kind of a two-tone look without having to do a whole lot of work, which also helps to kind of pick out the forms here and there and make them a little bit more dynamic. And so, this is also where paying close attention to everything you see comes in handy, and things along that line. So, once again, let's switch back over. Some of those folds in the skin and whatnot. But we get a pretty decent idea of what this figure is all kind of about. And there you have it. So that's, once again, a fairly quick gesture figure drawing. And once again, I could sit there and be much more detailed with this. If I wanted to do this in charcoal, I could definitely sit there and, blend much more easily and do a lot of, really subtle kinds of things to describe the form and whatnot. But so you can see, I can kind of smudge this a little. It's pretty messy, kind of like charcoal, but I can kind of generalize it a little bit more here and there. But once again, that's kind of just, this isn't really meant to be a fully rendered drawing, a fully rendered sketch or anything like that. Instead, it's meant to be more of a kind of practice, if you will. And this is also something that, done from life, we're having to do it very, very quickly because, especially if a guy's trying to hold this type of pose, he's not going to be able to hold it very long, at least, accurately. It's going to shift somewhat and things like that. But, the other thing here, I can see that, my nose here is not quite big enough, and the face kind of doesn't cut in quite enough and things like that. But once again, that's kind of beside the point because we get the basic idea of what's trying to take place here, and that's what really matters in this, or at least for this particular exercise. So once again, we could sit there and kind of nitpick a bunch of things and really look for different angles and issues that we could fix and manipulate here and there and all that kind of stuff. But once again, that's the kind of basic idea. And so once again, so with this one, I'm drawing a kind of male figure. However, it's going to have certain qualities to it that, say, a female figure, which we're about to do next, won't have. Because, musculature in the male anatomy is a little bit more, rigid, a little bit more geometrical, things of that nature. Versus the kind of softer curves and whatnot in the female form. So if you'll allow me to switch my paper over here really quickly, we will get the female version going here so we can see a little bit different quality. You can see I've got my newsprint attached to my clipboard here, my large clipboard, so that everything kind of stays in place and whatnot. But you can also see that I'm drawing on an easel. I'm drawing a little bit at a weird angle compared to what I would normally do for the purpose of the camera. But in school we would always do this standing up because it gives you much more free kind of dynamic range of motion in your arm. I definitely recommend that you try doing a few standing up if you can, especially if you have your larger paper and your Conte. Like, really let your whole arm kind of play with it and everything like that. So let's do the second figure now. This one, once again, is the female figure. And I'm going to start off once again the same way. I'm going to make a tick mark up top, and I'm going to make a tick mark at the bottom. And so I know that that's how tall I want the figure to be. Now this particular one is a little bit more compact, so I'm not going to have so much width to her. So let's say the widest point is at her knee. If we compare that to, say, so let's say her head's going to be there, and then half and half, maybe there. So we need her to be roughly that wide. Once again, this is just generally speaking, so I'm going to try to work in these kind of frameworks. So, but once again, let's start by doing a kind of skeletal gesture. So in this case, I'm going to start with her head, which is a little bit more oval shape. And then I'm also going to kind of follow that through with the spine, because her general angle is somewhat like that, but she's also slightly curved. Now, this line is meant to indicate where her hip is. And once again, I'm going to use that angle sighting to create a line for her hip, so that we could think of, her one leg coming off of one side and the other coming off the other. And likewise, I want to do the same thing for the shoulders. And her head is kind of rested on her shoulder, or at least her right shoulder, but the left shoulder in my perspective. So I want that shoulder to bisect where the head is. And then likewise, I want to look at, how the angle of the leg in relation to that corner of the hip there. And so I actually want to adjust that just slightly. But I'm going to look at that, and I want to say the angle of her leg follows the angle of her hip pretty closely. But we've also got the counterpoint, because her leg is bent, she's sitting on a stool, and her other leg, which is going to come off of here, we're just going to do as a single line down to the bottom there. Now likewise, I also want to do her arms coming off of her shoulders there. And they're going to go down to the hip, basically. But I also want to make an angle for her hand. And in this case, I also want to do that. So there's the basic kind of gesture of our figure here. So once again, it's rather abstract, and it's a very basic kind of stick figure-like form, but from this we can then go on and elaborate more. So let's also, and so once again, you can see that was a fairly quick, maybe under a minute, thereabouts. But then, so we could do multiples of these to kind of warm up, and then we can do one like this just to start. I always recommend that you start off like this, kind of lightly and everything like that, and then from there we can build on that form. But let's go ahead and add the stool that she's sitting on. So it's going to be something like that. Something like that. And I also need that to cross where her foot is. And we're also going to have a little bit of a kind of cloth that she's seated on here too. So we'll make an indication of that. So once again, and then I can come in and do the stool legs and everything like that. All right, so from there, let's go ahead and start to kind of add a little bit of mass to her form as well. So once again, we've got her kind of, basic, kind of shape and everything like that. also want to think about angles of certain things, like her breasts there. We also want to think about, you know, how her torso is interacting there as well, and that kind of bend in her abdomen. And then from there, we want to think about the more open, you know, kind of form of her leg there. And it's important to note too that I'm looking at a lot of these things in relation to, you know, where these lines connect to other lines. So for instance, in the bend of the knee here, we have one line that forms the back of her calf, but also forms part of, you know, her thigh as well. So we want to, you know, consider these kinds of things as well. Now from there, got something like that. Once again, she's kind of rested on this chair here, and it has a kind of cloth thrown over it. And so we've also got her hand. And then we've also got the leg extending out. And her foot's kind of arched somewhat as it hits the ground. So once again, from here, now she's also got her hair kind of up in a bun, so we'll add a little bit of something there too. But let's also come through and add a little bit of shadow here and there, just to indicate certain things. So once again, this isn't wholly accurate yet, but we get a basic idea of what the form is actually doing. Get a little bit of shading going on just to give us an idea. I'm going to make a few little indications of the cloth and things like that. Indications of some of those shadows and what have you. And we're going to kind of emphasize some of those things as well. All right, so now that we've got a basic kind of form, once again, it still looks a little bit abstract, might be a little hard to tell what all is happening, but once again, we have a kind of framework that we've built up a little bit, and we have a little bit more mass to it, and from this we can use this as guidelines to go in and start refining it. So I'm going to switch back over to my more pointed you know, piece. And in this case, I'm going to actually start with her face this time. So I'm going to make another angle here. And that's the angle between the corner of her eye and the top of her ear there. So then I also know that the ear needs to fall somewhere in there. So we know that her ear needs to be there. Her nose needs to be something like that. And her face crosses her shoulder there somewhat. We're gonna make, you know, some indications of her hair and some things like that. We'll get more into some of those details here in just a second. But we will kind of, once again, we'll make a few indications here and there. So, now let's do, and once again, I'm trying to be bold in, you know, my mark making. So I'm trying to think of, you know, how can I do really kind of bold type of lines that kind of hit right off the bat. Now, once again, I'm going to jump around a little bit because I find that, you know, there's certain like exterior lines like the back of her arm there are pretty easy to kind of lay in and see. But some of the ones in the interior can be a little bit more tricky. So I want to start on, you know, harder edge lines that give me more indications to work from. And so, you know, as you can probably tell, the picture I'm drawing from is of a nude model. If you were doing this in school, this would all be from a nude model. No questions asked about it. But obviously you're probably drawing with, you know, clothing on and everything like that, or, you know, from pictures of people with clothing on, or from life with people with clothing on. And that's a little bit of a different beast in and of itself. And we can definitely do another, you know, kind of video where we can address certain things like that. So, because once again, it presents different challenges, different ideas, things of that nature. Because, you know, the pure human form is definitely going to have much more of these kind of soft curves and things of that nature than, say, you know, somebody who's got clothing on, where that's going to have much more hard angles from the folds and things like that. So, all right, that line's pretty good. And what's interesting about this, like, I haven't done this in years, and maybe it's evident, maybe it's not, but the more and more you do it, the easier it becomes. So I feel like this one is already going better than the first one did, and I thought that one turned out decent considering, you know, once again, I hadn't done this in a very long time. But we want to look at all of these different kinds of things. Let's not forget our cloth. So, you know, you can also see that I'm not really going to try to be detailed in terms of drawing all of her fingers, but I'm going to make some kind of indications of those fingers here and there. Make a few kind of indications of other elements here and there. Things like that. So, you know, we've got chair legs and the ties and things like that there. Now let's do back of her arm there. All right, so from there, once again, you know, I can sit there and make some more kind of dark indications, and I can go through and deepen some of the shadows and whatnot. So I'm going to switch back over to my deeper, or my less detail-y piece of Conte here. So, you know, the other thing I can do is make some indications in her hair and things like that. Let's also say that, you know, the front part here is a little darker. The other thing that you'll notice in drawing the human figure, especially a nude human figure, or, you know, at least parts of the body that are more exposed, is that in the skin tones you'll see these kind of half shadows. So it'll be like, you know, this area is in shadow, but there's a slight reflection on the underside of her thigh there, you know, which is light reflecting off of the cloth and what have you. And so those are, you know, little things to pay attention to, because they'll, you know, they're easy to miss, but they'll also add a lot of detail and realism to your drawing as well. So let's go back to the eraser for just a second. Once again, I can come back in and make much more kind of specific details and things of that nature. So let's also the other thing too is that, you know, this Conte is rather messy, so you're gonna want to, you know, have that sandpaper ready to clean your eraser off if you use it. If you use your eraser with it, because it definitely muddies the eraser up much more than the charcoal will, and it doesn't come off quite as easily either. So just something to be aware of. And so, you know, I can come in and add a few other little kind of detail-y things. I want to erase out some more of her face. once again, this particular drawing, I'm trying to go fast. So, I'm not trying to be super detailed or anything of that nature. I want to have a little bit of detail to kind of indicate certain ideas, but it's not necessary to be, completely accurate for something that's meant to be as fast as this is. So let's also just a few detaily things here and there. And there you have it. Once again, a fairly straightforward, fairly simple, yet very quickly done figure drawing. And so, I want you to kind of try to do a few of these things. And so remember, once again, we started very simply with just our stick figure, and we were, looking at our basic angles of the form and, the basic angles of the different elements that we see, and then we kind of fleshed it out vaguely, and then we went in and added a little bit more specificity to it. So that's at least the kind of crux of what we're trying to do here. And once again, we're trying to get this idea of the kind of spontaneity of this kind of drawing, because once again, if we were drawing from an actual living person, they would be twitching and moving a little bit, and it would be hard, or at least more difficult to be completely almost photographically accurate on such a simple passing. Instead, what we would do is we would do gestures kind of like this, and then we would begin to refine from there, and things of that nature. So that's something that I think is important to note, is that this is meant to be a kind of simple kind of thing. We're not supposed to be too uptight about this just yet. Now, I want to show you one other thing with this before I go, and that's that these light areas where we have the highlight against say her shoulder, which is supposed to kind of come down here. Well, that's it's made a little cartoony by the whole fact that I've got this hard black outline around her. So let me kind of pull a few of these highlights back out a little bit here and there, and I'll show you something that we can do to alleviate that idea, or that issue, if you will. So from there, what I could do is come in and add an indication of that kind of background shadow. And things of that nature to just make it pop out just a little bit more if I wanted. And likewise, I could go in and try to kind of erase out more, and once again with the Conte, it's really difficult to do, and you're not really going to actually be able to erase all that much, but we could create a little bit more idea of the emphasis here and there, and all kinds of things like that. So that's pretty much it. Once again, let me know in the emails and whatnot. I think, you know, you've been doing the gesture drawings and everything like that. I think we, or you should try to, you know, do some gestures kind of in this nature. And then from there, we can move on to starting, you know, start to kind of render the human form a little bit more wholeheartedly, if you will, or at least more realistically, so we would actually take our, you know, really, you know, our time with it and everything like that. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I might also send you a person on Instagram to look at who does a lot of gesture drawings like this, just for your own reference and everything like that. But thanks for joining me, and, you know, let me know what you think.